Chapter 56 of The Roots of the Mountains by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Talk upon the Wildwood Way. On the morrow morning, when they were on their way again, Face of God left his own folk to go with the house of the steer a while, and amongst them he fell in with the Sunbeam, going along with Bowmay. So they greeted him kindly, and Face of God fell into talk with the Sunbeam as they went side by side through a great oak wood, where for a space was plain greensward, bare of all underwood. So in their talk he said to her, "What deemest thou, my speech friend, concerning our coming back to guest in Silverdale one day?" "The way is long," she said. "That may hinder us, but not stay us," said Face of God. "That is sooth," said the Sunbeam. Said Face of God, "What thing shall stay us? Or deemest thou that we shall never see Silverdale again?" She smiled. "Even so, I think thou deemest, Goldmane, but many things shall hinder us besides the long road." Said he, "Yea, and what things?" "Thinkest thou," said the Sunbeam, "that the winning of Silverstead is the last battle which thou shalt see?" "Nay," said he, "nay." "Shall thy dale, our dale, be free from all trouble within itself henceforward? Is there a wall built round it to keep out for ever storm, pestilence and famine, and the waywardness of its own folk?" "So it is as thou sayest," quoth Face of God, "and to meet such troubles and overcome them, or to die in strife with them, this is a great part of a man's life." "Yea," she said, "and hast thou forgotten that thou art now a great chieftain, and that the folk shall look to thee to use thee many days in the year?" He laughed and said, "So it is. How many days have gone by since I wandered in the wood last autumn, that the world should have changed so much?" "Many deeds shall now be in thy days," she said, "and each deed as the corn of wheat from which cometh many corns. And a man's days on the earth are not over many." "Then farewell Silverdale," said he, waving his hand toward the north. "War and trouble may bring me back to thee, but it may be naught else shall. Farewell." She looked on him fondly but unsmiling, as he went beside her, strong and warrior-like. 3 paces from him went Bowmay, barefoot, in her white kirtle, but bearing her bow in her hand. A leash of arrows was in her girdle, her quiver hung at her back, and she was girt with a sword. On the other side went Woodwant and Woodwise, lightly clad but weaponed. Woodmother was riding in an oxwain just behind them, and Woodfather went beside her bearing an axe. Scattered all about them were the men of the steer, gaily clad, bearing weapons, so that the oak wood was bright with them, and the glades merry with their talk and singing and laughter. And before them down the glades went the banner of the steer, and the white beast led them the nearest way to Burgdale. End of chapter 56. Chapter 57 of The Roots of the Mountains by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How the host came home again. It was 14 days before they came to Rosedale, for they had much baggage with them, and they had no mind to weary themselves. And the wood was nothing loathsome to them, whereas the weather was fair and bright for the more part. They fell in with no mishap by the way, but 103 of runaways joined themselves to the host, having watched their goings and wotting that they were not foemen. Of these some had heard of the overthrow of the Dusky Men in Silverdale, and others not. The Burgdalers received them all, for it seemed to them no great matter for 80 or so of newcomers to the Dale. But when the host was come to Rosedale, they found it fair and lovely, and there they met with those of their folk who had gone with Dalach. But Dalach welcomed the kindreds with great joy, and bade them abide, for he said that they had less need to hasten, since he had sent messengers into Burgdale to tell men there of the tidings. Albeit they were mostly loath to tarry, yet when he lay hard on them not to depart as men on the morrow of a guild feast, they abode there 3 days, and were as well guested as might be. and on their departure they were laden with gifts from the wealth of Rosedale by Dalloch and his folk. Before they went their ways, Dalloch spake with Face of God and the chiefs of the Dalesmen, and said, "Ye have given me much from time to time, when ye found me in the wood a naked wastrel. Yet now I would ask you a gift to lay on the top of all that ye have given me." Said Face of God, "Name the gift, and thou shalt have it, for we deem thee our friend." "I am no less," said Dalloch, "as in time to come I may perchance be able to show you. But now I'm asking you to suffer a score or two of your men to abide here with me this summer, till I see how this folk, new born again, is like to deal with me. For pleasure and a fair life have become so strange to them that they scarce know what to do with them or how to live, and unless all is to go awry, I must needs command and forbid. And though belike they love me, yet they fear me not, so that when my commandment pleaseth them, they do as I bid, and when it pleaseth them not, they do contrary to my bidding. For it hath got into their minds that I shall in no case lift a hand against them, which indeed is the very sooth. But your folk they fear as warriors of the world, who have slain the Dusky Men in the market-place of Silverstead, and they are of alien blood to them, men who will do as their friend biddeth, think our folk, against them who are neither friends or foes. With such help I shall be well holpen." In such wise spake Dalloch, and Face of God and the chiefs said that so it should be, if men could be found willing to abide in Rosedale for a while. And when the matter was put abroad, there was no lack of such men amongst the younger warriors, who had noted that the Dale was fair amongst dales, and its women fairer yet amongst women. So 210 of the Burgdale men abode in Rosedale, no one of whom was more than 25 winters. Forsooth, divers of them set up house in Rosedale, and never came back to Burgdale save as guests. For a half score were wedded in Rosedale before the year's ending, and 7 more, who had also taken to them wives of the goodliest of the Rosedale women, betook them the next spring to the Burg of the Runaways, and there built them a stead, and drew a garth about it, and dug and sowed the banks of the river, which they called Ingleborn. And as years passed, this same stead throve exceedingly, and men resorted thither both from Rosedale and Burgdale, for it was a pleasant place, and the land when it was cured was sweet and good, and the wood thereabouts was full of deer of all kinds. So their stead was called Ingleborn after the stream, and in latter days it became a very goodly habitation of men. Moreover, some of the once enthralled folk of Rosedale, when they knew that men of their kindred from Silverdale were going home with the men of Burgdale to dwell in the Dale, prayed hard to go along with them, for they looked on the Burgdalers as if they were new gods of the earth. The Burgdale chiefs would not gainsay these men either, but took with them 70 from Rosedale, men and women, and promised them dwelling and livelihood in Burgdale. So now, with good hearts, the host of Burgdale turned their faces toward their well-beloved Dale, and they made good diligence, so that in 3 days' time they were come anigh the edge of the woodland wilderness. Thither in the eventide, as they were making ready for their last supper and bed in the wood, came 3 men and 2 women of their folk, who had been abiding their coming ever since they had had the tidings of Silverdale and the battles from Dalloch. Great was the joy of these messengers as they went from company to company of the warriors, and saw the familiar faces of their friends, and heard their wonted voices telling all the story of battle and slaughter. And for their part the men of the host feasted these stay-at-homes and made much of them. But one of them, a man of the House of the Face, left the host a little after nightfall, and bore back to Burgstead at once the tidings of the coming home of the host. Albeit since Dalloch's tidings of victory had come to the Dale, the dwellers in the steads of the countryside had left Burgstead and gone home to their own houses, so that there was no great multitude abiding in the thorp. So early on the morrow was the host astir, but ere they came to Wildlake's Way, the shepherd folk turned aside westward to go home, after they had bidden farewell to their friends and fellows of the Dale, for their souls longed for the sheep-cots in the winding valleys under the long grey downs, and the garths where the last year's ricks shouldered up against the old stone gables, and where the daws were busy in the tall unfrequent ash-trees, and the green flowery meadows adown along the bright streams, where the crowfoot and the pagels were blooming now, and the harebells were in flower about the thorn-bushes at the down's foot, whence went the savour of their blossom over sheep-walk and water-meadow. So these went their ways with many kind words, and 2 hours afterwards all the rest of the host stood on the level ground of the portway. But presently were the ranks of war disordered and broken up by the joy of the women and children, as they fell to drawing goodman or brother or lover out of the throng to the way that led speediest to their homesteads and halls. For the war leader would not hold the host together any longer, but suffered each man to go to his home, deeming that the men of Burgstead, and chiefly they of the Face and the Steer, would suffice for a company, if any need were, and they would be easily gathered to meet any hap. So now the men of the Middle and Lower Dale made for their houses by the road and the lanes and the meadows, and the men of the Upper Dale and Burgstead went their ways along the portway toward their halls, with the throng of women and children that had come out to meet them. And now men came home when it was yet early, and the long day before them, and it was, as it were, made giddy and cumbered with the exceeding joy of return, and the thought of the day when the fear of death and sundering had been ever in their hearts. For these new hours were full of the kissing and embracing of lovers, and the sweetness of renewed delight in beholding the fair bodies so sorely desired, and hearkening the soft wheedling of longed-for voices. There were the cups of friends beneath the chestnut trees, and the talk of the deeds of the fighting men, and of the heavy days of the home-abiders. Many a tale told oft and o'er again. There was the singing of old songs and of new, and the beholding the well-loved nook of the pleasant places, which death might well have made naught for them. And they were sweet with the fear of that which was past, and in their pleasantness was fresh promise for the days to come. So amid their joyance came evening and nightfall, and though folk were weary with the fullness of delight, yet now for many their weariness led them to the chamber of love before the rest of deep night came to them to make them strong for the happy life to be begun again on the morrow. House by house they feasted, and few were the lovers that sat not together that even. But Face of God and the Sunbeam parted at the door of the house of the Face, for needs must she go with her new folk to the house of the Steer, and needs must Face of God be amongst his own folk in that hour of high tide, and sit beside his father beneath the image of the god with the ray-begirt head. End of chapter 57. Chapter 58 of The Roots of the Mountains by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. How the Maiden Ward was held in Burgdale. Now May was well worn when the host came home to Burgdale, and on the very morrow of men's homecoming they began to talk eagerly of the midsummer weddings, and how the Maiden Ward would be the greatest and fairest of all yet seen, whereas battle and deliverance from battle stir up the longing and love both of men and maidens. Much also men spake of the wedding of Face of God and the Sunbeam, and needs must their wedding abide to the time of the Maiden Ward at midsummer, and needs also must the Sunbeam go on the ward with the other brides of the folk. So then must Face of God keep his soul in patience till those few days were over, doing what work came to hand, and he held his head high among the people, and was well looked to of every man. In all matters the Sunbeam helped him, both in doing and in forbearing, and now so wonderful and rare was her beauty that folk looked on her with somewhat of fear, as though she came from the very folk of the gods. Indeed, she seemed somewhat changed from what she had been of late. She was sober of demeanour during those last days of her maidenhood, and sat amongst the kindred as one communing with herself. Of few words she was, and little laughter, but her face clear, not overcast by any gloom or shaken by passion. Soft and kind was she in converse with others, and sweet were the smiles that came into her face if others' faces seemed to crave for them. For it must be said that as some folk eat out their hearts with fear of the coming evils, even so was she feeding her soul with the joy of the days to be, whatever trouble might fall upon them, whereof belike she foreboded some. So wore the days toward midsummer, when the wheat was getting past the blossoming, and the grass in the mown fields was growing deep again after the shearing of the scythe, when the leaves were most and biggest, when the roses were beginning to fall, when the apples were reddening and the skins of the grape berries gathering bloom. High aloft floated the light clouds over the dale, deep blue showed the distant fells below the ice mountains, the waters dwindled. All things sought the shadow by daytime, and the twilight of even and the twilight of dawn were but sundered by 3 hours of half-dark night. So in the bright forenoon were 17 brides assembled in the gate of Burgstead, but of the rest of the dale were 23 looked for, and with these was the Sunbeam, her face as calm as the mountain lake under a summer sunset, while of the others many were restless and babbling like April throstles, and not a few talked to her eagerly, and in their restless love of her dragged her about hither and thither. No men were to be seen that morning, for such was the custom that the carles either departed to the fields and the acres, or abode within doors on the morn of the day of the maiden ward. But there was a throng of women about the gate and down the street of Burgstead, and it may well be deemed that they kept not silence that hour. So fared the brides of Burgstead to the place of the maiden ward on the causeway, whereto were come already the other brides from steads up and down the dale, or were even then close at hand on the way. And among them were Longcoat and her 2 fellows, with whom Face of God had held converse on that morning whereon he had followed his fate to the mountain. There then were they gathered under the cliff wall of the portway, and by the roadside had their grooms built them up bowers of green boughs to shelter them from the sun's burning, which were thatched with bulrushes and decked with garlands of the fairest flowers of the meadows and the gardens. Forsooth, they were a lovely sight to look on, for no fairer women might be seen in the world, and the eldest of them was scant of 25 winters. Every maiden was clad in as goodly raiment as she might compass. Their sleeves and gown hems and girdles, yea, their very shoes and sandals were embroidered so fairly and closely that as they shifted in the sun they changed colour like the kingfisher shooting from shadow to sunshine. According to due custom, every maiden bore some weapon. A few had bows in their hands and quivers at their backs. Some had naught but a sword girt to their sides. Some bore slender shafted spears, so as not to overburden their shapely hands. But to some it seemed a merry game to carry long and heavy thrust spears, or to bear great war axes over their shoulders. Most had their flowing hair coiffed with bright helms. Some had burdened their arms with shields. Some bore steel hauberks over their linen smocks. Almost all had some piece of war gear on their bodies, and one, to wit, Steedlinden of the Sickle, a tall and fair damsel, was so arrayed that no garment could be seen on her but bright steel war gear. As for the Sunbeam, she was clad in a white kirtle embroidered from throat to hem with work of green boughs and flowers of the goodliest fashion, and a garland of roses on her head. Dalewarden himself was girt to her side by a girdle fair wrought of golden wire, and she bore no other weapon or war gear, and she let him lie quiet in his scabbard, nor touch the hilts once, whereas some of the other damsels would be ever drawing their swords out and thrusting them back. But all noted that goodly weapon, the yoke-fellow of so many great deeds. There then on the portway, between the water and the rock wall, rose up plenteous and gleeful talk of clear voices, shrill and soft, and whiles the maidens sang, and whiles they told tales of old days, and whiles they joined hands and danced together on the sweet summer dust of the highway. Then they mostly grew aweary, and sat down on the banks of the road or under the leafy bowers. Noon came, and therewithal goodwives of the neighbouring dale, who brought them meat and drink and fruit and fresh flowers from the teeming gardens. And thereafter for a while they nursed their joy in their bosoms, and spake but little and softly when the day was at its hottest in the early afternoon. Then came out of Burgstead men making semblance of chapmen, with a wain bearing wares, and they made as though they were wending down the portway westward to go out of the dale. Then arose the weaponed maidens and barred the way to them, and turned them back amidst fresh springing merriment. Again in a while, when the sun was westering and the shadows growing long, came herdsmen from down the dale, driving neat, and making as though they would pass by into Burgstead. But to them also did the maidens gainsay the road, so that needs must they turn back amidst laughter and mockery, they themselves also laughing and mocking. And so at last, when the maidens had been all alone a while, and it was now hard on sunset, they drew together and stood in a ring, and fell to singing. And one Goldmay of the house of the bridge, a most sweet singer, stood amidst their ring, and led them, and this is somewhat of the meaning of their words. The sun will not tarry, now changeth the light, fail the colours that marry the day to the night. Amid the sun's burning bright weapons we bore, for this eve of our earning comes once and no more. For to-day hath no brother in yesterday's tide, and to-morrow no other alike it doth hide. This day is the token of oath and behest, that ne'er shall be broken through ill days and best. Here the troth hath been given, the oath hath been done, to the folk that have thriven well under the sun. And the gifts of its giving our troth day shall win, are the dale for our living and dear days therein. O sun, now thou wanest, yet come back and see, amidst all that thou gainest how gainful are we. O witness of sorrow wide over the earth, rise up on the morrow to look on our mirth. Thy blooms art thou bringing back ever for men, and thy birds are a-singing each summer again. But to men little-hearted what winter is worse than thy summers departed that bore them the curse? And e'en such art thou knowing where thriveth the year, and good is all growing save thraldom and fear. Naught such be our lovers' hearts drawing anigh, while yet thy light hovers aloft in the sky. Lo, the seeker, the finder of death in the blade, what lips shall be kinder on lips of mine laid? Lo, he that hath driven back tribes of the south, sweet-breathed is thine even, but sweeter his mouth. Come back from the sea then, O sun, come aback, look adown, look on me then, and ask what I lack. Come many a morrow to gaze on the dale, and if e'er thou seest sorrow, remember its tale. For 'twill be of a story to tell how men died in the garnering of glory that no man may hide. O sun sinking under, O fragrance of earth, O heart, O the wonder whence longing hath birth. So they sang, and the sun sank indeed, and amidst their singing the eve was still about them, though there came a happy murmur from the face of the meadows and the houses of the thorpe aloof. But as their song fell, they heard the sound of footsteps a many on the road. So they turned and stood with beating hearts, in such order as when a band of the valiant draw together to meet many foes coming on them from all sides, and they stand back to face all comers. And even therewith, their raiment gleaming amidst the gathering dusk, came on them the young men of the dale, newly delivered from the grief of war. Then, in very deed, the fierce mouths of the raisers of the war-shout were kind on the faces of tender maidens. Then went spear and axe and helm and shield clattering to the earth, as the arms of the newcomers went round about the bodies of the brides, weary with the long day of sunshine, and glee and loving speech. And the maidens suffered the young men to lead them whither they would, and twilight began to draw round about them, as the maiden band was sundered. Some they were led away westward down the portway to the homesteads thereabout, and for divers of these the way was long to their halls, and they would have to wend over long stretches of dewy meadows, and hear the night wind whisper in many a tree, and see the east begin to lighten with the dawn, before they came to the lighted feast that awaited them. But some turned up the portway straight towards Burgstead, and short was their road to the halls where even now the lights were being kindled for their greeting. As for the Sunbeam, she had been very quiet the day long, speaking as little as she might do, laughing not at all, and smiling for kindness' sake rather than for merriment. And when the grooms came seeking their maidens, she withdrew herself from the band, and stood alone amidst the road nigher to Burgstead than they. And her heart beat hard, and her breath came short and quick, as though fear had caught her in its grip. And indeed, for one moment of time, she feared that he was not coming to her, for he had gone with the other grooms to that gathered band, and had passed from one to the other, not finding her, till he had got him through the whole company and beheld her awaiting him. Then indeed he bounded toward her, and caught her by the hands, and then by the shoulders, and drew her to him, and she nothing loath, and in that while he said to her, "Come then, my friend, lo thou, they go each their own way toward the halls of their houses, and for thee have I chosen a way over the footbridge yonder, and over the dewy meadows on this best even of the year." "Nay, nay," she said, "it may not be. Surely the Burgstead grooms look to thee to lead them to the gate, and surely in the house of the Face they look to see thee before any other. Nay, Goldmane, my dear, we must needs go by the portway." He said, "We shall be home but a very little while after the first, for the way I tell of is as short as the portway. But hearken, my sweet, when we are in the meadows we shall sit down for a minute on a bank under the chestnut trees, and thence watch the moon coming up over the southern cliffs. And I shall behold thee in the summer night, and deem that I see all thy beauty, which yet shall make me dumb with wonder when I see it indeed in the house amongst the candles." "Oh nay," she said, "by the portway shall we go. The torch-bearers shall be abiding thee at the gate." Spake Face of God, "Then shall we rise up and wend first through a wide treeless meadow, wherein amidst the night we shall behold the kine moving about like odorous shadows, and through the greyness of the moonlight thou shalt deem that thou seest the pink colour of the eglantine blossoms, so fragrant they are." "Oh nay," she said, "but it is meet that we go by the portway." But he said, "Then from the wide meadow come we into a close of corn, and then into an orchard close beyond it. There in the ancient walnut tree the owl sitteth breathing hard in the night time, but thou shalt not hear him for the joy of the nightingales singing from the apple trees of the close. Then from out of the shadowed orchard shall we come into the open town meadow, and over its daisies shall the moonlight be lying in a grey flood of brightness. Short is the way across it to the brim of the weltering water, and across the water lieth the fair garden of the Face, and I have dight for thee there a little boat to waft us across the night dark waters, that shall be like wavering flames of white fire where the moon smites them, and like the void of all things where the shadows hang over them. There then shall we be in the garden, beholding how the hall windows are yellow, and hearkening the sound of the hall glee borne across the flowers and blending with the voice of the nightingales in the trees. There then shall we go along the grass paths, whereby the pinks and the cloves and the lavender are sending forth their fragrance to cheer us who faint at the scent of the overworn roses and the honey sweetness of the lilies. All this is for thee, and for naught but for thee this even, and many a blossom whereof thou knowest naught shall grieve if thy foot tread not thereby tonight, if the path of thy wedding which I have made be void of thee, on the even of the chamber of love. But lo, at last at the garden's end is the yew walk arched over for thee, and thou canst not see whereby to enter it. But I know it, and I lead thee into, and along the dark tunnel through the moonlight, and thine hand is not weary of mine as we go. But at the end shall we come to a wicket, which shall bring us out by the gable end of the Hall of the Face. Turn we about its corner then, and there are we blinking on the torches of the torch-bearers, and the candles through the open door, and the hall ablaze with light and full of joyous clamour, like the bale-fire in the night, kindled on a ness above the sea by fisher-folk remembering the gods. "Oh, nay," she said, "but by the port way must we go, the straightest way to the gate of Burgstead." In vain she spake, and knew not what she said, for even as he was speaking he led her away, and her feet went as her will went, rather than her words. And even as she said that last word, she set her foot on the first board of the footbridge, and she turned aback one moment and saw the long line of the rock wall, yet glowing with the last of the sunset of midsummer, while as she turned again, lo, before her the moon was just beginning to lift himself above the edge of the southern cliffs, and betwixt her and him all Burgdale, and face of God moreover. Thus then they crossed the bridge into the green meadows, and through the closes, and into the garden of the Face, and on to the hall door. And other brides and grooms were there before them, for 6 grooms had brought home brides to the house of the Face. But none deemed it amiss in the war leader of the folk, and the love that had led him. And old Stoneface said, "Too many are the rows of beast-skeps in the gardens of the Dale, that we should begrudge wayward lovers an hour's waste of candle-light." So at last those twain went up the sun-bright hall, hand in hand in all their loveliness, and up onto the dais, and stood together by the middle seat, and the tumult of the joy of the kindred was hushed for a while, as they saw that there was speech in the mouth of the war-leader. Then he spread his hands abroad before them all, and cried out, "How then have I kept mine oath, whereas I swore on the holy boar to wed the fairest woman of the world?" A mighty shout went rattling about the timbers of the roof in answer to his word, and they that looked up to the gable of the hall said that they saw the ray-ringed image of the god smile with joy over the gathered folk. But spake Ironface, unheard amidst the clamour of the hall, "How fares it now with my darling and my daughter, who dwelleth among strangers in the land beyond the wildwood?" End of chapter 58. Chapter 59 of The Roots of the Mountains by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The behest of Face of God to the bride accomplished, a motestead appointed for the 3 folks, to wit, the men of Burgdale, the Shepherds, and the children of the Wolf. 3 years and 2 months thereafter, 3 hours after noon, in the days of early autumn, came a wain tilted over with precious webs of cloth, and drawn by 8 white oxen into the market-place of Silverstead. 210 of spearmen of the tallest, clad in goodly war-gear, went beside it, and much people of Silverdale thronged about them. The wain stayed at the foot of the stair that led up to the door of the moat-house, and there lighted down therefrom a woman goodly of fashion, with wide grey eyes, and face and hands brown with the sun's burning. She had a helm on her head, and a sword girt to her side, and in her arms she bore a yearling child. And there was Cumbome with the second man-child born to Face of God. She stayed not amidst the wondering folk, but hastened up the stair, which she had once seen running with the blood of men. The door was open, and she went in and walked straightway, with the babe in her arms, up the great hall to the dais. There were men on the dais. Amidmost sat Folkmite, little changed since the last day she had seen him, yet fairer she deemed than of old time, and her heart went forth to meet the chieftain of her folk, and the glad tears started in her eyes and ran down her cheeks as she drew near to him. By his side sat the bride, and her also Bome deemed to have waxed goodlier. Both she and Folkmite knew Bowmay ere she had gone half the length of the hall, and the bride rose up in her place and cried out Bowmay's name joyously. With these were sitting the elders of the Wolf and the Woodlanders, the more part of whom Bowmay knew well. On the dais also stood aside a score of men, weaponed and looking as if they were awaiting the word which should send them forth on some errand. Now stood up Folkmite and said, Fair greeting and love to my friend and the daughter of my folk. How farest thou, Bowmay, best of all friendly women? How fareth my sister, and face of God my brother? And how is it with our friends and helpers in the goodly dale? Said Bowmay, It is well, both with all those and with me, and my heart laughs to see thee, Folkmite, and to look on the elders of the valiant, and our lovely sister the bride. But I have a message for thee, from face of God. Wilt thou that I deliver it here? Yea, surely, said Folkmite, and came forth and took her hand, and kissed her cheeks and her mouth. The bride also came forth and cast her arms about her, and kissed her, and they led her between them to a seat on the dais beside Folkmite. But all men looked on the child in her arms and wondered what it was. But Bowmay took the babe, which was both fair and great, and set it on the knees of the bride, and said, Thus saith face of God, Friend and kinswoman, well-beloved playmate, the gift which thou badest of me in sorrow, do thou now take in joy, and do all the good thou wouldest to the son of thy friend. The ring which I gave thee once in the garden of the face, give thou to Bowmay, my trusty and well-beloved, in token of the fulfilment of my behest. Then the bride kissed Bowmay again, and fell to fondling of the child, which was loath to leave Bowmay. But she spake again, To thee also, Folkmite, I have a message from face of God, who saith, Mighty warrior, friend and fellow, all things thrive with us, and we are happy. Yet is there a hollow place in our hearts which grieveth us, and only thou and thine may amend it. Though whiles we hear tell of thee, yet we see thee not, and fain were we, might we see thee, and what if the said tales be true? Wilt thou help us somewhat herein, or wilt thou leave us all the labour? For sure we be that thou wilt not say that thou rememberest us no more, and that thy love for us is departed. This is his message, Folkmite, and he would have an answer from thee. Then laughed Folkmite and said, Sister Bowmay, seest thou these weaponed men hereby? Yea, she said. Said he, These men bear a message with them to face of God my brother. Crow the shaft speeder, stand forth and tell thy friend Bowmay the message I have set in thy mouth, every word of it. Then Crow stood forth and greeted Bowmay friendly, and said, Friend Bowmay, this is the message of our alderman. Friend and helper, in the dale which thou hast given to us, do all things thrive. Neither are we grown old in 3 years' wearing, nor are our memories worsened. We long sore to see you, and give you guesting in Silverdale, and one day that shall befall. Meanwhile, know this, that we of the Wolf and the Woodland, mindful of the earth that bore us, and the pit whence we were digged, have a mind to go see Shadowy Vale once in every 3 years, and there to hold high tide in the ancient hall of the Wolf, and sit in the doom ring of our fathers. But since ye have joined yourself to us in battle, and have given us this dale, our health and wealth, without price and without reward, we deem you our very brethren, and small shall be our hall glee, and barren shall our doom ring seem to us, unless ye sit there beside us. Come then, that we may rejoice each other by the sight of face and sound of voice, that we may speak together of matters that concern our welfare, so that we 3 kindreds may become one folk. And if this seem good to you, know that we shall be in Shadowy Vale in a half-month's wearing. Grieve us not by forbearing to come. Lo, Bowmay, this is the message, and I have learned it well, for it pleaseth me to bear it. Then said Folkmite, What sayst thou to the message, Bowmay? It is good in all ways, said she, but is it timely? May our folk have the message and get to Shadowy Vale so as to meet you there? Yea, surely, said Folkmite, for our kinsmen here shall take the road through Shadowy Vale, and in 4 days' time they shall be in Burgdale, and as thou wottest, it is scant a 2 days' journey thence to Shadowy Vale. Therewith he turned to those men again and said, Kinsman Crow, depart now, and use all diligence with thy message. So the messengers began to stir, but Bowmay cried out, Oh, Folkmite, my friend, I perceive thou art little changed from the man I knew in Shadowy Vale, who would have his dinner before the fowl were plucked. For shall I not go back with these messengers, so that I also may get ready to wend to the moat house of Shadowy Vale? But the bride looked kindly on her, and laughed and said, Sister Bowmay, his meaning is that thou shouldest abide here in Silverdale till we depart for the folk thing, and then go thither with us. And this I also pray thee to do, that thou mayst rejoice the hearts of thine old friends, and also that thou mayst teach me all that I should know concerning this fair child of my brother and my sister. And she looked on her so kindly as she caressed the babe, that Bowmay's heart melted, and she cried out, Wouldst that I might never depart from the house wherein thou dwellest, O bride of my kinsman? And this that thou biddest me is easy and pleasant for me to do. But afterwards I must get me back to Burgdale, for I seem to have left much there that calleth for me. Yea, said Folkmite, and art thou wedded, Bowmay? Shalt thou never bend the yew in battle again? Said Bowmay soberly, Who knoweth, chieftain? Yea, I'm wedded now these 2 years, and naught I looked for less when I followed those twain through the wildwood to Burgdale. She sighed therewith and said, In all the dale there's no a better man of his hands than my man, nor any goodlier to look on, and he is even that Hart of Highcliffe whom thou knowest well, O bride. Said the bride, Thou sayest sooth, there is no better man in the dale. Said Bowmay, Sunbeam bade me wed him when he pressed hard upon me. She stayed a while and then said, Face of God also deemed I should not naysay the man, and now my son by him is of like age to this little one. Good is thy story, said Folkmite. Deemest thou, Bowmay, that such strong and goodly women as thou, and women so kind and friendly, should forbear the wedding and the bringing forth of children? Yea, and we, who may even yet have to gather to another field before we die, and fight for life and the goods of life. Thou sayest well, she said. All that hath befallen me is good since the day whereon I loosed shaft from the break of the bent over yonder. Therewith she fell a-musing, and made as though she were hearkening to the soft voice of the bride caressing the new-come baby, but in sooth neither heard nor saw what was going on about her, for her thoughts were in bygone days. Howbeit presently she came to herself again, and fell to asking many questions concerning Silverdale and the kindred, and those who had once been the thralls of the Dusky Men. And they answered all duly, and told her the whole story of the Dales since the day of the victory. So Bowmay and the carles who had come with her abode for that half-month in Silverdale, guested in all love by the folk thereof, both the kindreds and the poor folk. And Bowmay deemed that the bride loved Face of God's child little less than her own, whereof she had 2, a man and a woman, and thereat was she full of joy, since she knew that Face of God and the Sunbeam would be fain thereof. Thereafter, when the time was come, fared Folkmite and the bride, and many of the elders and warriors of the Wolf and the Woodland, to Shadowy Vale, and Dalek and the best of Rosedale went with them, being so bidden, and Bowmay and her following according to the word of the bride. And in the Shadowy Vale they met Face of God, and Alderman Ironface, and the chiefs of Burgdale and the Shepherds, and many others, and great joy there was at the meeting. And the Sunbeam remembered the word which he spoke to Face of God when first he came to Shadowy Vale, that she would be wishful to see again the dwelling wherein she had passed through so much joy and sorrow of her younger days. But if any one were fain of this meeting, the alderman was glad above all, when he took the bride once more in his arms, and caressed her whom he had deemed should be a very daughter of his house. Now telleth the tale of all these kindreds, to wit, the men of Burgdale and the Sheepcotes, and the children of the Wolf and the Woodlanders, and the men of Rosedale, that they were friends henceforth, and became as one folk, for better or worse, in peace and in war, in waning and waxing, and that whatsoever befell them, they ever held Shadowy Vale a holy place, and for long and long after they met there in mid-autumn and held converse and counsel together. No more as now telleth the tale of these kindreds and folks, but maketh an ending. End of chapter 59. End of The Roots of the Mountains by William Morris.